there, folks. This is Bob from BBD, Geopolitical Views. Today, my question is, why is it that Russia is interested in India? Just look at the map, right? Can you see that? That's Russia there, right? Whole bunch of land between Russia and India. There's obviously no land threat here, right? Similarly, the Indian Ocean really is not their backyard, right? The current issues really, you have Ukraine here, you have a huge amount of heating up of the South China Sea, which is here, right? Look at that. Why is Russia really interested in India? This is a point for my discussion today, and let's see whether I can turn some people around from their rosy tinted views about USSR and our pretended non-alignment and independent foreign policy, folks. So welcome back, folks. Part of this has to obviously do with history and 1971, but it goes back to 1976 when they played a real dubious role in Tashkent. They traded away the Hajipir Pass. We didn't understand the importance of this, but I'm quite sure they did, right? Similarly, the assurances given to us by none other than Sergei Lavrov forced us off Kailash Hills in this latest Farrakas, again at the handmaiden of China. So they are not an honest broker. Never have been, never will be. Their interest for India at that time, essentially, folks, had to do a lot with the Cold War and the desire to control India, the desire to create a socialist or a communist country, where they had the Communist Party of India doing their job, and they had interfered completely with India's politics, its foreign policy, its defense procurement. And this, I want you to read this out, because this has never played out. And I take Swaminathan Shankaraya at his words, because he does a lot of research. And he writes this, he's writing about actually debating the foreign hand when Greta Thunberg kind of commented, but said there's a much bigger threat here. And what does he say? Toolkits, we need to worry about Chinese hackers. But what he goes on to say is very important. When KGB archivist Vasil Mitrokhin defected to the UK in 1992, he brought 6 trunkloads of KGB files. These formed the basis of 2 books by Cambridge historian Christopher Andrews. His 2005 book, The Mitrokhin Archive 2, revealed India as a country up for sale by its politicians, bureaucrats and intelligence officials. Even cabinet members were said to be on the Soviet payroll. The BJP at that time protested loudly, but has stayed silent after coming to power. If foreign ownership of Indian politicians and bureaucrats is chalta hai, why worry about Rihanna, right? The Mitrokhin archive said India under Indira Gandhi was thoroughly infiltrated by the KGB. 10 Indian newspapers and 1 press agency were on the Soviet payroll. In 1972, the KGB claimed to have planted more than 3,500 articles in Indian newspapers. The KGB not only bought secrets from Indian cabinet ministers, but regularly paid them retainers. It seemed like the entire country was for sale. KGB General Oleg Kalugin told Mitrokhin he described India as a model for infiltration of a third world government, what you might call a fabulous toolkit. The book suggested the KGB beat the US Central Intelligence Agency in infiltrating officialdom. Kalugin, who was posted in Delhi in the 70s, claims the KGB even had a role in persuading Indira Gandhi to impose the 1975 emergency. The Communist Party of India, a member of the Comintern, was always an amply Viet-controlled communism, was always and amply financed by the Soviet Union. The CPI strongly supported the emergency, and I know this. I know who the conduit of the money from Russia was at that time, right? We had scores of sources throughout the Indian government, in intelligence, counterintelligence, the defense and foreign ministries and the police, says Mitrokhin, inciting Kalugin. On at least one occasion, a secret gift of 2 million rupees from Moscow to the Congress party was personally delivered to Gandhi. After midnight, he alleged. The KGB subsidized the election campaign of 21 politicians, including 4 cabinet ministers. The recent Chinese hacking highlights the need to cleanse India thoroughly infiltrated system. It must jail the guilty, sending a lesson to all. So here's the point, folks. The Russians have always played this dubious game, and these archives were never played out. I'm not sure all the generals who continue to support Russia on what account. I have no idea. Nobody has really looked at these KGB archives, and the Russians are up to their same no good. And now is a point where I will tell you what it is, right? Basically, there are four guys in this world, right, who are holding on to and trying to control their countries, keeping control through past grievances and humiliation and propagation of that, right? First one is Erdogan, right? He is delusional about his Ottoman Empire, right? Then is Xi. He's delusional about some 6th century greatness of China. Though knowing, when you look at China's actual map, it's a hand, it's a fist. All the periphery never ever belonged to China to start with. That's a map that everybody must look for, right? Then obviously you have the BJP and our Prime Minister, whose pet peeve is humiliation and this grief against the Mughals and the Muslims, right? Not ever playing out the fact that it was our internal dissensions that allowed that Mughal invasion to succeed in the first place, and they've totally forgotten about the British, right? Okay. Then Putin actually has a more recent grievance because he blames the United States and NATO, especially Reagan, for the breakup of the ex-powerful USSR. And his entire focus and entire gambit is to reclaim that position. That's why he's joining up with China, though he knows that China is a threat. They've actually fought a war in 1969. Why the Russians need India, which they won't tell you that, because they continue to think they are your friends and you need them more. That's why he invited us to Vladivostok. He wants to keep that channel open for India all the way up to the Pacific, and he knows the Sinicization of is moving fast and forward in Siberia. In fact, 2 million Chinese were deported not as far as just when this pandemic opened, and not very many people know that, folks. So it's important to understand why India was important then. Was about the Cold War, essentially, nothing else. They wanted to make us this socialist outpost of Russia, USSR, and they kind of knew where to press the buttons about independent foreign policy. And at the end of the day, Russia is far more comfortable with the white Anglo-Saxon in America than it is with the Chinese, right? Just please remember that. Now, why India is important is because we are landed because Indo-Pacific, the Pacific is becoming hot and the most important arena of occupation, and India, through its luck, it straddles that channel, folks, and that is a geostrategic leverage that we have, and we had all the opportunity to make use of it had we not thrown it down the drain the way our hubris handled this particular virus. And that's the important part. Welcome back, folks. So going on to this dubious process of the Russians, they're playing a double game, as you can see it, because India is really a collateral kind of asset for them, right, which has become rather important at this stage because of the Indo-Pacific narrative. And like I said, while in that Raisana, our dialogue, we were saying Indo-Pacific, he continued to say Asia-Pacific. So what do we say here? This is Foreign Policy Press written by Michael Kugelman, who knows this, right? He says, Russia Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov visited India and Pakistan this week, underscoring Moscow's growing clout in South Asia. Russia's recent influence in the region includes its mediation of border talks between India and China, its increasing role in an Afghan peace process with major Pakistani involvement. This is important, right? He says, in an interview with Hindustan Times, he said that Russia was closely watching the process of normalization along the border. Now, this is the shame. This is a shameful announcement for our foreign minister and our foreign policy, right? What happened to non-alignment? What happened to third-party non-interference, right? Russia has hosted multiple meetings on Afghan reconciliation in the last 2 years, including one last month with Taliban leaders and representatives from Kabul, Beijing, Islamabad, Washington, but not New Delhi. Okay. Lavrov's second stop was Islamabad, the first visit there by a Russian foreign minister in 9 years. In private conversations, Russian analysts have played down the idea of a deepening Russian-Pakistan relationship, but Lavrov's visit, coupled with growing counter-terrorism cooperation, emerging energy collaboration, and convergent views on Afghanistan, tells a different story. His meetings resulted in pledges to increase military cooperation. What we have here is them trying to build up Pakistan as an alternative to India. India better be careful, right? But what is happening here is Russia actually is focused more focus is Europe, not India. It's using China essentially and the bulk of the Chinese renminbi to kind of dethrone the dollar. That's its attempt. He knows that if he dethrones the dollar, he's got it made, right? So what's he doing? He's putting pressure on the other side. Russian troops movement, talk of intervention caused jitters in Ukraine. Germany and US concerned over Russian troops near Ukraine. Ukraine calls for path into NATO after Russia masses troops. 150,000 Russian soldiers at Ukraine's border, it says European Union. Russia's positions more transport at Ukraine border. Biden offers unwavering support in call with Zelensky. Russia's Putin warns West to not cross red lines. So you know where the game is, right? We know how to defend our interests. Putin's emerging hardline. Putin intensifies war of protests against Biden. Putin warns West not to cross Moscow's red line. God knows what that is, right? Russian troop movement jangles nerves in Ukraine. Western government ponder possible motives. But on the other hand, he's losing some goodwill in Africa. African price for Russian vaccine blunts attack on unethical West. So you got Sputnik, even in India, folks, is going to cost a lot more than everything else. They are in this for money. They've taken control of half our pharmaceutical companies, while we and Mr. Modi and the Prime Minister and his his scientific advisors were taking advice from Baba Ramdev and Cornwell and Dr. Harshvardhan was on a nap. Welcome back, folks. Things are not really good in the USSR because Putin is intensifying the protests against him are widening, and he's threatening a lot of force being used. The other thing is the latest detonate that's happening. Iran and Saudi Arabia edge towards detonate. Remember, if that happens, that in that case, Russia and China are the big losers. Watch that space. But as Ruchir Sharma writes, another important wrote, Putin the imperious, why calls for new sanctions may further strengthen the walls of his fortress Russia. What he says is, once among the most crisis-prone emerging nations, Russia is now one of the most, perhaps the most conservative and stable. While peers like Turkey's Erdogan grow increasingly unorthodox on economic policy, Putin has become a model of extreme orthodoxy. The pillars of fortress Russia lie in the way the Kremlin manages its budget and the ruble. By the time the pandemic started to force lockdowns last year, Russia was ready. It entered the pandemic with the lowest government debt among the 20 largest emerging economies, just 14% of GDP. It also had the highest government surplus and fourth highest current account surplus, and the fourth largest foreign currency reserves, $580 billion. Okay, however, the flaw in Putin's strategy is that it's all defense, no offense. He talks of boosting the economy's anemic growth rate, which has averaged barely 2% over the past decade, but has offered no real plan to make it happen, and he obviously has none. Russia, like I told you, has not forgotten its past imperialism, as Edward Lucas writes, but not forever. The winds of change that blew away the British Empire in the 50s and 60s struck the Soviet Empire like a tornado in 89. Within 2 years, it was gone, a wrenching humiliation for imperial officials such as Vladimir Putin. That's the whole. Who called it the geopolitical catastrophe of the century? Even the most jingoistic flag wavers in this country do not say that about our empire. Imperial habits die hard, whereas Britain's overseas realm was shrunk to a sprinkling of fly specks useful for spying and money laundering. Russia plays geopolitics with its separatist enclaves in Georgia, Moldova, and Ukraine. Ukrainians see Russia's seizure of Crimea rather as the Irish regard the partition of the north an act of ruthless force entrenching a local imperial caste and depossessing the natives. Russians deride the idea of Belarus and Ukraine are real countries with real languages, culture and history, rather as we would treat Wessex or Mercian nationalism. Underpinning the unthinking prejudices are myths of wartime glory. Russia revels in the sacrifice and heroism of the Great Patriotic War. But herein lies the problem for Germany. Germany's uneasy bridge to Russia. It says, in short, the argument that a close economic energy relationship with Russia brings dividends in European security appears shaky, at least in the Putin era. The question German politicians should ask themselves is not how their country's moral debt to Russia is, but whether Nord Stream 2 and other bridges to Russia are achieving any worthwhile result. So the problem here, folks, is the guilt complex of the Germans because they killed over 2 million Russians. Cheers.